I know this is redundant, but this would be better for anyone who chooses to see only a portion of tonight's event. And I'd like to thank both Karen McMahon and Katrina Zeplowitz for responding to the League's questions on vote411.org, and again, urge people to make sure you read their thoughtful responses. There is also a description of an important bond act with pro and con reasons for it, and that's the Clean Water, Clean Air, Green Jobs Environment Act. That bond act will be on the back side of your ballot. So make sure when you vote, you turn the ballot over and vote for the bond, or vote for or against the bond act. The rules for tonight: a candidate must be present in order to participate, and we have to have at least 2 candidates for each race. Presentations are to be strictly confined to issues and not personalities. The order of opening statements has been determined by a draw. Closing statements will be made in the reverse order. The League is videotaping tonight's event. Only licensed media, including TV, radio, and newspapers, are entitled to air portions of the recording, in keeping with the Federal Communications Commission regulations. All others who air the recording may do so only in its entirety. It is the only recording of the event that is approved. League policy requires that no one in the audience records the event or any portion of the event. No one is permitted to publicly display edited footage or quotes in any manner. Each candidate shall have 2 minutes for opening and closing statements, and they will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. Both candidates will be responding to each question, and the timekeeper will warn them at 1 minute 30 seconds, and then finally a nice big red stop sign. All questions are being submitted in writing by the audience. Tonight's event is a dialogue between the audience and the candidates. It is not a debate. We request that audience members refrain from applause until the end of the event. So we begin the opening statements from New York State Assembly with Karen McMahon.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Great. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and the Amherst Senior Center for hosting us today. It has been 4 years since we were able to be together in person, so I really appreciate you all coming out tonight and being engaged in our election. No? Get closer, please. Closer? Should I just take it out, maybe? No. How's that? Is that better? Okay. What I just said was thank you, everyone. I'll move on. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Karen McMahon. I'm the New York State Assemblywoman from Amherst, from the 146th Assembly District. I grew up in Amherst. I raised my family here. I went to school here. It is my great honor and privilege to represent my hometown in Albany. I am an attorney by trade. I worked for about 30 years in the court system, first for judges of the Appellate Division of the New York State Courts, and then also for magistrate judges and district court judges of the United States District Court for the Western District. In 2016, I left the courts. I did a little bit of private practice for my husband, who's also an attorney. He has his own practice representing parents and kids with disabilities. So I did that for a little while. Then I decided to jump into politics. I worked in a campaign in 2017. I met wonderful people involved in the Amherst Democratic Committee, and then in 2018 I decided to run. It all worked out very well. I was elected in 2018, ran again in 2020, so this is my 3rd election. I love representing this town in Albany. I work very hard to do my very best, and I hope to be able to earn your vote tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and the Amherst Center for Senior Services for putting on this important candidates forum tonight. Thank you, everyone in the audience for coming and to learn about the candidates and their vision for our government. My name is Katrina Zeplowitz, running for New York State Assembly District 146, which is now all the town of Amherst. For over the past 10 years, I have worked in state and local county government, listening to people's frustrations on how Albany operates, especially the administrative offices under the state executive branch. The lack of active listening from Albany often leads many people jumping through numerous hoops to no avail, and after such exhaustive effort, they finally reach out to their state and local representatives for help in connecting with these state agencies, which seem to have no accountability to the people. Additionally, the lack of transparency during the budget process hurts everyone across the state. The lack of inclusion of stakeholders in the process leads to political jockeying, and we the people suffer because of it. I started as an intern at the New York State Assembly, where I learned the bill process and wrote legislative memos on local and statewide legislation. I was hired right after graduation to manage the Albany office before my husband and I moved permanently to Williamsville. It is through these experiences that I have understood many of the issues with our state government and why I decided to run for state assembly. I may be young at 32, but I understand the value of hard work, treating everyone equal, and that active listening is important from our state leaders. I look forward to discussing the issues that are important to our state and community. If elected, I am ready to actively listen to the people and the experts on various policy topics, and I am eager to get to work to make our state a more affordable and safe place to live, raise a family, and work, and that our state government is accountable and transparent in their actions and in their handling of state dollars and spending. Thank you.
Okay, and the first question goes to Ms. Zeplowitz. No, I'm sorry. The first question goes to Karen McMahon. There have been serious learning losses since the long stretch of remote learning. How do you think the state should address that?
I agree, there have been learning losses. I think kids really did suffer during the pandemic from having to learn remotely or in a hybrid situation. Some kids are more adaptable and it benefited them, but I think for a lot of kids it was a really difficult time. It's a difficult time for everyone. I think as a state what we can do is just support our teachers, support our schools, try to make sure that kids have the services they need and the supports that they need. I know that mental health has been an issue for a lot of kids in schools. I've talked to teachers who have said that the kids are not all right. They really had a lot of problems dealing with it, and I think the more we support our kids, our schools, and our teachers, I think our children, who are ultimately pretty adaptable, will bounce back.
Can you repeat the question?
There have been serious learning losses since the long stretch of remote learning. How do you think the state should address that?
I think that remote learning we all saw, fortunately my son was in daycare, but he also suffered as well with lack of the shutdown and all that. I think that our students really suffered during the pandemic years and trying to figure out, and there's a large gap in learning. I think putting the necessary resources into those, whether it be an additional help for each student that we need. I know math skills, I recently read was a big issue, and also reading. And I think putting those extra resources, even additionally on to help our students, is going to be a big focus. I also agree that mental health is a huge issue within our schools that we should really invest in. It should not be a stigmatized thing that students think that it's an issue if they don't stand up for their mental health and get services. I wholeheartedly agree that it's good for our children to speak to people, the right necessary people, and get the help and be able to do that openly and without stigma. I think as a state that the investments in those additional resources need to be evaluated, especially with the reportings coming out about it. And I do think mental health also needs more investment in our schools to really help them thrive and grow and return to some kind of additional normalcy and grow from where we're at. Leaving them behind is not an option. So I think the hard work and the research needs to be done and to come to some sort of conclusion.
All right, and you are the first person to answer the next question. We have all seen an increase in crime at all levels. Are you in favor of the current bail reform laws, or would you change the current policy?
So this is a really important issue for me. I think New York State is the only state in the nation that does not allow judges to consider public safety risk when determining pretrial release. Democrats, under the one-party rule, created a system that protects and emboldens criminals and to repeatedly commit crimes. Bail reform laws passed was, to me, overzealous policing by New York City Democrats who care more about making headlines than actual good public policy. It's evident when they tried to make these changes in the state budget. However, it still remains a large issue that we see each and every day. I believe that this past July special session could have been an opportunity for them to change it. However, they failed to do so. Albany failed to do so. For me, this issue really hit home personally after hearing of the senseless murder of Kara Hudson, a mother who feared for her life and was shot in front of her 3 children. I can't even imagine that story. Our district attorney here in Erie County said this could easily have been solved with one sentence in the bail reform law. That one sentence would provide judges with discretion to consider dangerousness when determining bail. That's one sentence that we could have done. I still believe that there needs to be a special session. I still think that that can happen. I still think we can have that one sentence put in and still be, what it was their original lofty goals of it. I think that, it was never about low-level crimes that were initially advocated for. It's the ugly stretch in policy that was not disclosed, that went too far and endangers too many. If elected, I will loudly work for that one sentence to be added into law because the evidence of its absence grows each and every day and Democrats sit idly by. That's the one of the dangerous byproducts of one-party rule. Thank you.
This is going to be a tough question to answer in 2 minutes, but I will do my best. Whenever I talk about bail reform, and to go back to the reasons that it needed to be reformed in the first place. We had a dual system of justice in our country, one for the haves, one for the have-nots. People who had means could post bail, regardless of their crime. People without money who could not post bail would languish in jail, while still innocent until proven guilty. They could lose their job, they could lose the ability to support their families, they could be possibly coerced into an unfavorable plea deal. So we had to do something about bail reform, to reform bail, and even our own Erie County District Attorney had instituted his own version of bail reform before the state even began to act on it. It was voted on in 2019. In 2020, we made some changes to bail reform because it was obvious that we had to increase the number of crimes that were bail eligible. So that's what we did then. I spoke to prosecutors, judges, defense attorneys, police chiefs to try and figure out how if the system was working and what we needed to do to improve it. This year, we gave judges some more discretion to hold defendants on bail if they were repeat offenders, so even if those crimes were minor. We also expanded the ability to set bail for some hate crimes and some gun crimes. Is it enough? Possibly not. The murder of Kara Hudson was horrible. Bail reform is an easy target to say that was the cause of that. In my view, our entire criminal justice system failed that poor woman and her family because we really don't address domestic violence in a way that protects victims. So I actually am authoring a bill to, I can finish my sentence, to increase a simple assault into a felony assault when committed against a domestic partner. I'm always working to fix bail.
And you are the first person to answer the next question. How will you unify the lack of trust with political parties?
How will I unify the lack of trust with political parties? I'm not quite sure I understand the question. I will do my best. I guess I would say that I try to work in a bipartisan fashion with people of both parties. When I'm in Albany, I have co-sponsored bills with Republican senators, Senator Rath, Senator Pat Galvin. I try to work with Republican members of the Assembly to get their ideas across the finish line. I'm happy to look at any idea, whether it's presented by a Democrat or Republican. If it's good for our state and good for my district, I'm happy to work in a bipartisan fashion. I don't always vote with my party. Sometimes I vote against my party. So I guess that is how I would say work with both parties.
I think unify is what makes it a difficult question.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
How will you unify the lack of trust with political parties?
I think today we live in a ultra polarizing environment. We see the megaphone on both the right and the left, and those are the loudest voice. And that's what you're seeing from both parties, in my opinion. Therefore, I think the majority of us who are in the middle, trying to come to the table to compromise and make good, sensible policies, we either aren't running or, but I am running, but they're either not running or they're getting drowned out by the megaphone, and they just kind of become more mouse in their manner. I think working across the aisle, once you're elected, you represent the entire community. It doesn't matter what party they are. You're supposed to be the voice. You, as a leader, are supposed to be an active listener. I always say that term because I love the term, and sometimes I think it drives my husband crazy because I use it on him, but I say, as elected officials, we are supposed to be actively listening to our constituents, which means hearing what you're saying, but also taking it in, taking what you're saying and really going and representing what you would like as a leader. And so that's what I think I would like to see for unifying, and hopefully that answers the question. If it doesn't, whoever did say it, come up to me afterwards, feel free. But that's what I'd like to see today, is our government get back to those basics of coming together, working for common sense, and making common sense policies that fit everyone.
Okay, and you are first for the next question. What is your opinion related to the right of a woman to choose whether or not to have an abortion?
So New York State in 2019 codified abortion rights into law, making it a fundamental right. The legislation that passed, obviously being signed into law, it's there. For me, that's not the reason that I got into running. That's not the reason I got into running. I know it's a fundamental right, and in the state, I understood that. It was not a motivating factor for me. I believe this election is about a lot more. I got into this race because I believe that our state's future is, headed in the wrong direction. And I want to fight for things that are necessary to where we're living right now. The improvement of our economy, state spending, providing for your families, paying for things that are important, creating a more business-friendly environment to generate more revenue. And, that's that's the reason why I got involved. So, you know, for me, it's New York. Where we're at in New York is where we are. You know, that's fundamental right, and it's not my position to question that. It's my position to move forward, and you know, that's where I'm coming from. And hopefully that answers the question to whoever answered it. You know, again, if you want to come up to me afterwards and say you don't like my answer, then that's fine. But you know, I hope that you understand. You know, that's the reason why I got involved. I got involved to help out, you know, my neighbor, to help out my grandparents, to help out my son's future, to help out, you know, that's why I got involved in running, is to help my neighbor and you know, represent the best that I can for that, so.
Could you repeat the question?
What is your opinion about the right of a woman to choose whether or not to have an abortion?
I've always been a pro-choice woman myself. And one of the first votes that I took when I became an Assemblywoman back in 2019 was the Reproductive Health Act. And I very proudly voted to codify into New York State law the protections that were established in Roe v. Wade. At the time, I never imagined that Roe v. Wade would be reversed, would be, you know, just thrown away. But we always said it was so important to codify it in New York State for that very reason. Now, I feel it's really tragic. There are women in some parts of the country who do not have the same rights as we do in New York State. And I really fear for women in other parts of the country. I also fear for people in New York State based on the reasoning of the Dobbs decision. People who may be in interracial marriages, the right to contraception, the right to same-sex marriage. It all is based on the same legal analysis as Roe v. Wade. So when people say things are settled in New York, we don't have to worry about it, I don't believe that. As soon as it was, the Dobbs decision came out, and people said, oh, it just is going back to the states, 2 weeks later they were talking about a national ban. So I think it's really important. We've also passed an Equality Act in New York, the Equality Amendment, which will be on the ballot eventually, to make it a constitutional right in New York State. I think it's a fundamental right, and that we've learned that we cannot take for granted. Thanks.
And you will be first for the last question. Do you believe in term limits for all elected officials? Why? Why not?
I actually disagree with Congressman Higgins on this. I have no problem with term limits. I find it a little disturbing to look, particularly in Washington, where there are people well into their 80s still in office, and I wonder if that's really not something that we should be encouraging. I think the other side of that coin is that term limits must be long enough to give people a chance to learn the job, to be able to grow in the job, to be able to do some good. I would say if you're going to limit someone, it's got to be at least 10 years, I would think. Not everybody's going to serve that long, but it does take time to kind of learn, like to grow in the job, to learn the ins and outs of it, and to become effective. And then of course, you know, when you're in there longer, you are perhaps a committee chair or in a position of leadership. So experience does matter. So term limits are okay if the term is long enough, if it's not limited too much. That's my position.
So here's where we both agree. Look at that. As far as term limits go, you know, I do think, you know, I don't know, speaking from a philosophical standpoint of political science, I guess, you know, did the founders think about that when they were writing it? You know, did they think about term limits? I'm not sure, you know, back then they were were just farmers and things going into it for the good of the people, go in for a few years and then go back, and that was their duty, you know. There are some career politicians, and they are out of touch, in my opinion. And they are aging, perhaps, out of you know, there might be an age limit and term limit that should be given. You know, I think that you do have to have a few terms to just long enough to kind of learn the process and get across the finish line. You know, certain aspects, you know, maybe 10 years is a good idea. You know, it's all, you got to figure out what maybe could be, but I think, do I think we'll ever see term limits? No, I honestly don't think I'll ever see term limits, because why would anyone who's been in there for so long put term limits on themselves because they're going along and having a good time? Right now making quite a good amount of money, so, you know, do I ever see that happening? Unfortunately, no. Would I like to see that? I think so. You know, that would be something to have them connected back with their community. Even if it's they have to then take a break and then go run again, you know. Making sure you're remembering where you're from and the roots that you have is very important for our state government, to make sure they're listening to us and representing us in the right manner in all aspects that they do. So I do agree term limits would be a great idea.
Okay, and now it's time for closing statements, and so, Ms. Zeplowitz, you got to be the first person to make yours.
Thank you again to the League of Women Voters and the Amherst Center for Senior Services for hosting tonight's Candidates Forum. If I am elected on November 8th, I pledge to be a state assembly member who represents everyone equally, regardless of party. I run proudly as a mother, wife, and citizen of the United States, New York State, and town of Amherst. I will always put the interests of our entire community first. I will vote to fix bail reform laws that erode public safety and prioritize criminals over victims. I will vote to cap state spending that has increased over $50 billion in just the past 4 years. I will always have an open door policy so that any Amherst resident can meet with me to discuss issues of their concern, and while we may not always agree, I will always respect your opinion, listen carefully, and be open-minded. I will be an assembly member who focuses on the needs of our seniors to make sure they are not forgotten. I will look out for families struggling in this inflationary economy. I will advocate for the needs of people with disabilities and fight for better wages for our caregivers. If elected 2 years from now, I want our Amherst community to be able to say that I kept my word, worked hard for our community, looked out for those who cannot always look out for themselves, and was an active listener and a caring and concerned assembly member. Thank you again for your time and consideration. Again, my name is Katrina Zeplowitz, and I'm asking for your vote for State Assembly on Election Day. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for your time and attention tonight. We're getting kind of near the end. I think there's one more forum to go. I would just like to say it is an honor and a privilege for me to be able to represent the town of Amherst and Albany. I've learned so much during the past 4 years, and I hope to earn your vote for another term. When I ran in 2018, I did it because I felt that I could be a better representative for our community, and would be a better be able to bring resources to our town, to improve it, to help it become and to stay the great place it is to raise a family, to work, to play. I think I've been able to do that. I've had some really great legislative victories in my time in the Assembly. I had a bill to increase opportunities for equal pay. I had a few bills passed this year. One was to require the Department of Labor to post a poster in the workplace describing all the rights and services and resources available for veterans. I had a couple of environmental bills passed this year. One would allow home producers of solar energy to donate extra credits to low-income families. And I've also been able to secure grants for the town for infrastructure, for parks, for the Summit Center for Autism. I've been able to procure grants for inclusive playground equipment, school security projects, for body cams and computers for the Amherst Police Department, and a lot of infrastructure projects for volunteer fire companies in our district. So I think I've had a successful term, a couple of terms in the Assembly. I ask for your votes, and I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for this evening, for responding to the questions.